The restaurant was quiet, bathed in the soft golden light of chandeliers that reflected off wine glasses and crisp white tablecloths. It was one of those places where people whispered instead of talked, where laughter sounded like an interruption. Yet, that night, the silence at one table told a story louder than any noise ever could. A man in his early 30s sat nervously, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the menu. Across from him sat a woman, her head slightly bowed, her breathing uneven. They were both victims of something cruel, though only one of them knew it. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of hearts over appearances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread. It helps us spread the stories that remind the world what humanity truly means. His name was Ethan, a single dad who had been through more in 5 years than most people go through in a lifetime. After losing his wife to cancer, he had raised his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, all on his own. Life hadn't been kind, juggling 2 jobs, school runs, and endless bills, but Ethan still carried a quiet grace about him. He wasn't the man who complained, he was the one who smiled through pain, because he knew little eyes were always watching him. His co-workers, however, didn't understand that kind of strength. To them, Ethan was the boring dad, the quiet guy who never went to parties or dated anyone. They thought he needed to live a little. So one afternoon, out of boredom and misplaced humor, they decided to set him up on a blind date. What Ethan didn't know was that it was all a cruel prank, a joke they would record to share in their group chat. They found a kind-hearted woman named Rachel, someone who had spent most of her life being judged for her size rather than her soul. She had no idea she was part of a setup either. To her, it was a genuine date with someone who might finally see her for who she was. When Ethan arrived that evening, he was wearing his cleanest white shirt, the one his daughter called his lucky one. Rachel, on the other hand, had spent hours mustering the courage to come. She had been stood up before, laughed at before, and yet she chose to try again. But when she entered the restaurant and saw 3 men snickering from another table, phones slightly raised, her heart began to sink. Something didn't feel right. As the date began, Ethan could sense her nervousness. She barely lifted her eyes from the menu, afraid to see pity in his. For a while, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. Behind them, the men whispered and chuckled, recording tiny clips, thinking they were witnessing another funny moment. But then something shifted. Ethan looked at Rachel, really looked. He saw not what others saw, but what pain had tried to hide. There was kindness in her eyes, the kind that comes from years of being hurt yet still choosing to be gentle. He broke the silence softly, asking her about her day, her work, her dreams. She was hesitant at first, but his sincerity slowly opened her up. They began talking about books, about family, about life's strange ways of testing people. For the first time that night, Rachel smiled. And it wasn't forced. Meanwhile, the 3 men in the corner continued to record, waiting for Ethan to realize it was all a joke. They were expecting him to walk out, to get angry, or to embarrass her. But instead, something they never imagined happened. After dinner, Ethan stood up, smiled, and asked Rachel to wait a moment. He walked straight over to the table where the men were sitting, their smirks frozen as he approached. Calmly, he placed his phone on their table and said, "I know what you're doing." One of them tried to laugh it off, but Ethan's voice grew firmer, not loud, but the kind that carried weight. "You thought it would be funny to humiliate someone. You thought pain was entertainment. But let me tell you something, the strongest people I've ever met are the ones you mock. People who still show up, who still believe in love, who still choose to be kind even when the world hasn't been kind to them." The room fell silent. Even the background music seemed to fade. Ethan's words weren't shouted, they were spoken with the kind of calm that pierces deeper than anger ever could. "You set me up with one of the most genuine people I've met in years," he continued. "So, thank you, because instead of your joke breaking someone, it reminded me that kindness still exists." He turned back toward Rachel, who was watching, tears brimming in her eyes. Ethan walked back to their table, pulled out the chair for her, and said, "Let's finish dinner. I think I'd rather focus on someone real than on people who've forgotten what that means." The men behind him sat speechless, their laughter long gone. One of them lowered his phone, shame washing over his face. What began as a cruel setup had turned into something far greater. Rachel couldn't stop her tears, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen her worth without judgment. Ethan smiled gently and told her, "You know, my daughter always says beauty is what makes people feel safe. I think she's right." The evening went on, no longer awkward or heavy. They talked for hours, realizing how much they shared, not just pain, but resilience. Two people who had been broken by life, finding pieces of hope in each other's words. By the end of the night, Ethan asked if he could see her again, and Rachel said yes with a trembling smile. Outside the restaurant, as they said goodbye under the streetlight, the three men who had mocked them earlier quietly deleted the video from their phones. The laughter that had once filled their group chat was replaced by silence, and, eventually, guilt. Ethan walked home later that night, thinking about how strange life could be. A cruel joke had led to something genuine, and maybe that was the universe's way of teaching a lesson, not just to the men who had laughed, but to everyone watching. The next morning, he told his daughter about the dinner. Little Lily listened wide-eyed, then said softly, "Daddy, I think Mommy sent her to us." Ethan smiled, holding back tears. Maybe she had. Weeks later, Ethan and Rachel met again, and again after that. What started as a prank turned into something beautiful, a bond built not on appearances, but on understanding. And when those same men saw them together months later, walking hand in hand with little Lily, they realized that the joke had been on them all along. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread, because the world needs more reminders that kindness is never wasted, and love always finds a way back. Before you go, comment below. Speech balloon: kindness is stronger than cruelty. Because sometimes, a cruel setup becomes the beginning of a beautiful story that changes everyone involved, forever.